Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So welcome back to Kingdomize, the podcast. And guys, this is quite amazing. We set out to do one recording on Kingdomize your church, and this is number 3. Clearly, there's a lot to be said, and we already know that we're not even going to scratch the surface. So if you're listening to the third today, we're glad you are, and we will readily admit that we are working through what this looks like to actually bring the kingdom to the church. We have dialogues about, well, isn't the kingdom the church and the church is the kingdom, and yes and no. And so we'll talk about that today specifically, guys. And just so you know, I'm here with my good friends, Bruce Friesen, Bruce Mann. I'm Brian Beatty. We're 3 of the Kingdomize guys. And we are here to talk about the church, the ecclesia, but not as the big worldwide scenario. We really want to focus in today on the church, the church leader, and how do we honor those that are called to minister and serve a local church, a local congregation, a local group of believers, if you will. So that's where we're going today. And we want to do it under a couple, 2 or 3 headings intentionally. We want to talk about the calling to pastoral ministry, the calling, and that phrase alone we're going to touch on. What does pastoral ministry mean? What is it to be a pastor? We're going to hit that today. We're going to talk about that, the calling to the church, to the church mountain, about the lifestyle. What does it mean? What does it mean to be this guy that lives his whole life? Him and his family live our life totally in front of everyone to look at and go, that's perfect, or that's terrible. That's fun. Bruce, man, I can't wait to get there to see what how you're going to teach that about us. And lastly, we're going to talk about, how does your church have kingdom impact outside the church? Can you get enough kingdom culture inside that it spills out everywhere we go? So guys, this should be fun. And if we can do this in under 30 minutes, that will be a miracle. People go, look, there is a God. Those 3, Bruce, and Brian, were done in less than 30 minutes. And they'll say, I need to turn to God because clearly he's real. Yes? So Bruce Friesen, I want you to lay the foundation of, and just to remind us, we've come out of 2 weeks talking about ecclesia, the governing body. Jesus said, I'll build my church. And we've hit the broad mountain of what that means in the 7 mountains. Today we're focusing in. So bring us from there into, what does it mean to be called to lead a local church, a local congregation, a local group of believers?
Well, as we've been identifying, it's one of the mountains. It's not the mountain, and it isn't necessarily the kingdom, but whether that we have the other mountains of education, government, media, arts, entertainment, economy, we've got to recognize the role of the leader, just like Jesus designated his 12 disciples as apostles. Their plan is to do what Jesus did. And that Jesus, what he did is he reproduced himself within others. So the role of the leader of a congregation, and we'll get into that in a while, but the role is to be equipping the body to do the work. But in equipping the body to do the work, Paul identifies in, first of all, Galatians 1:15, and then in Ephesians 3:7 and 8, that before he was born, that the Lord called him to be an apostle. But then he talks to the church and he says, for Ephesians 4:1, I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord, I urge you to walk worthy of the vocational calling you have received. He's writing to the whole church. It's a circulatory letter. It's going to transcend time. But then he goes on to, in verse 7, each one of you have been given grace. And then in verse 11 and 12, he's identifying grace to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Most of those that we call pastors in our churches are more likely to be apostles or prophets or evangelists as well, and usually combinations. And they're actually maturing everyone in the body in their vocational identity so that they can be sent ones into their families into the education, into their workplace, or the sphere that they believe God's called them to. So some of them might be called into business, some of them into the arts, so into a different area. But how are they to be kingdom citizens, fully equipped to kingdomize the world that they're living in, working in? And really, it's shifting the understanding of, I think this is why Jesus, even after 3.5 years of teaching on the kingdom, even after he was resurrected, Acts 1 verse 3, for 40 days, he's still teaching them on the kingdom. So we have to kingdomize our congregants to be kingdomizing their world.
Yeah.
And so this is the calling of the leader, is to understand his call and the process of modeling what Jesus modeled, of how to do this.
Really good. So Ephesians 4, then you've got these 5 significant people, ministry gifts that are people, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, their role. And again, I say every time we hit Ephesians 4, that the focus on Ephesians 4 isn't even them. The focus on Ephesians 4 is the saints. And the goal of those giftings is to equip the saints, as you said. So that's what I heard you say. Did I hear that correctly? So you've got these leaders. Whatever gift you are, if you're leading a congregation of people, your role is to find out how other people are gifted and release them well into the real world. Am I hearing that correctly?
You are hearing that correctly.
I love that. Look at us communicate well. I know that, you know what's exciting already? Some people went, you just said apostles out loud. I don't know if I can listen anymore. It's okay. Take a breath. We address that in our new book that just came out about what an apostle is. And we're not going to do it here. We've addressed it in our book. So just go by, just Kingdomize it. You'll be okay. It'll be fine. You'll be fine. So that's really good. Bruce, that is a great setup. And I want to volley over to Bruce Mann now for a minute, because I know, Bruce, you want to talk a bit about those giftings specifically, because we talk about pastors in North America, or most churches in the world say, this is our pastor. But that's not really what we're saying. I mean, we're saying it because we've addressed every leader in churches as pastors. But as Bruce Friesen just said, they're probably not all pastors. In fact, most leaders of churches probably aren't pastorally gifted. So clear this up for us under lifestyle. Like, how do we focus on that?
Yeah, we live in a time really we're still in the influence of an old understanding of the pastor, and we're entering a new phase where this tension between the pastoral gifting, which is we can understand about shepherding, nurturing, providing comfort to people, to encourage them and to help them grow, and that's a deep spiritual gift. But we kind of lump this whole idea of pastoring as both that plus leading what sometimes is a very complex organization that requires strong action, sometimes to challenge perceptions, to take risks, to challenge people's behavior. Those two don't fit real well together. And so we have this problem that's mostly, just the language we use. We've addressed it already in terms of the idea of church. We use language like, I go to this church, this is my church, I'm part of this church. We're actually members of congregations. Theologically, there's only one church. There are the congregations or the church that meets here, but they're connected. But we live in a time when there's deep division, sometimes segregation in terms of theological understanding, focus, and all that sort of stuff. So how do we as leaders navigate these tricky problems in terms of just the language that we use? And so for today, I'm going to use the word of congregational leader, not just simply the sort of catch word pastor, because I think everyone probably listening understands there's a spiritual gifting of pastoring or shepherding that's not necessarily strongly gifted to lead.
Can you go deeper on that? And I don't know how you would do it, but maybe under the banner of the Ephesians 4 connected to the Romans 12 motivational gifts, like what gifts the pastor has, which doesn't equip him to be the confronter, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't mean they can't, right? But our spiritual gifting causes us to have leanings towards a certain bent, and that the strong pastoral gifting of pastoring or shepherding, it's very protective, right? These are wonderful qualities, but they don't necessarily serve well in a organizational structure where there is strong leadership that's needed. So there is a tension there, and it's not that they can't coexist, but most of us have a leaning towards what we're strongly gifted in, and so we have to be very aware that sometimes the best thing a pastor can do is challenge somebody, not comfort them, right? Not placate them or just simply appease. They need to challenge, right? And so that's where there's this tension. And so the language sometimes is what confuses us. I guess my point in all that is that leading a congregation, which is what we're focusing on today, it requires more than just caring for people.
Moses had a burning bush experience where God called him and sent him to basically deliver his people. But in doing so, as a leader, and this is for every leader, they have to learn to live between the pastoral and the prophetic. The pastoral wants to keep everybody together, everybody in unity. They're concerned of the peace and the unity of the body. But sometimes the cloud may move, but they're so focused on keeping the people together, they've lost sight that the clouds move. And the prophetic is focused so on the cloud, they're wanting to go, whether anybody's going with me or not, I'm going. Yet the Word of God teaches us only together are we made complete or finish. Only together are we going to experience the destiny. So you've got to learn to be able to bring everybody along and yet prophetically be following where God is leading, having a vision. When a leader doesn't, he has so much difficult time with his elders, his leaders, and the community of who are we, where are we going, and or the prophetic leader that's just prophetic. This is where we're going. This is the vision. This is the calling. He will drive the sheep rather than lead them. And so we need to recognize as leaders, you have to learn to live in this tension and do this dance.
That's really good. And that does go back, Bruce Mann, to what you said about this really is a leadership issue, right? So whatever your primary calling is, let's say you're a pastor or a prophet, whatever, out of Ephesians 4, and knowing it's really a call to know yourself. Either you know yourself, here's my bent, or as you were saying that the bent thing, it's like I've always seen it as your glasses, right? Your motivational gifts are like the glasses you see your world through. So yeah. I'm going to see my, Romans 12, I'm going to see it through compassion or giving or leadership or blah, 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 whatever. I have to recognize that and recognize that, as you just said, Bruce Friesen, that I can't keep pushing people. Sometimes they need to be brought along. And there is that prophetic. Sometimes they need a hug. Just need a hug. So knowing how to lead well. And Bruce, man, I want to come back to you because we were talking about, numbers of times we've talked about this, but you've had great dialogue before about expectations, like knowing yourself. What are the expectations on me, on that those have around me? Let's go there a little bit for the church leader, for the congregational leader, knowing yourself, knowing the expectations. What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say that, in some respects, those who are leading a congregation, we give them this title pastor, but they're leaders, right? And it requires a high level of personal awareness and wisdom to do that well. But it's not that different from those who lead in other organizational settings. they don't have a whole sort of this aura around them that somehow they just have all the right answers. And leadership is yes, a gift, but it's also a skill. And one of the skills that's required, as we just touched on, is the fact that they need to recognize they're not the whole package. Right? One of the best skills that a leader can have is to know where they're not gifted, to know where they're not effective, and bring people around them and engage people to create this completeness that really is I use the expression sometimes that that it's not, the new wine is not in the grape, it's in the cluster, right? The expression of the body of Christ in all of its multiple giftings is what really makes the difference. But for those who are tasked with the role of leading, it's not about simply executing certain things in terms of skills. It's about understanding the dynamics of leadership and the body, and how do you become a conduit for others to put them in places where they can succeed. But it's challenging because there are incredible expectations often put on those who are in pastoral roles or congregational or leadership roles. And it has an impact on family. And so to get really practical, I remember, I'm going to tell a little story. Hopefully this is helpful for people. But I remember when I was leading a camp, I was a camp director, and we had one particular staff member who came, and I won't give his name, but he had been a missionary kid. He had grown up in Africa, and it's often been challenging for the children of those who, what we would say are the children of those in ministry. But I recognized in him tremendous qualities, tremendous confidence, and not in a flamboyant way, but just someone who was well adjusted, could lead well, was well liked, seemed to be able to handle himself in a way. And I remember pulling him aside and just chatting with him about it, because I knew he had grown up in Africa. I knew he was a missionary's kid. And I said, tell me about your home life. I want to understand why, how you became who you are. And he was very quick to say this. He said, when I was growing up, my parents never put expectations on me to perform, to, be an example to a group of people, that somehow validated who they were. He said they were instructive, they were caring, they taught us well, they disciplined us. And so what I say that to tell that little story to say, sometimes when we are in these roles that are highly visible, as parents, we can put expectations on our children to somehow validate our leadership and our spirituality by how our children behave, right? And those, if anything's going to tear your family apart, that's going to do it, right? Because it's not true. It's not helpful, and it's not it's not done with the right motivation. And so I'm saying all that to say that sometimes leading in a as a congregational leader can be very difficult, and it requires us to actually live very true to our calling, but honest in other settings, meaning our marriages, our families, and all that, so that we can actually demonstrate real people leading in real circumstances who also have real challenges, and doing it in such a way that we are demonstrating how God can work in our lives, how God can work in our marriages, how God can work in our families. And I'm kind of focusing on that because sometimes we forget that this person we call a pastor has a family. He has got a life. He's got obligations. He has to pay his bills. He has to discipline his children. And so getting really real about this, I think is helpful to take that weight off. Not to say just go do what you want, but to take the expectations off that somehow this is a model for everybody else. The model is in how we handle it, not that it's perfect. And so I don't know if that's helpful for people, but I'm trying to focus in on this idea that even though people are in various leadership roles, and in this case, we're talking about those who lead congregations, they're still real people. They're still dealing with the issues of life that everyone else is. The expectations of society, they have to deal with that. The financial issues, family issues, time issues, all those things that everybody, and we don't live in a time when it's any easier than it, like it's easier now than it has been. It's not. It's more difficult. There are more influences. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, I'll stop there. But I want to honor pastors, congregational leaders, because they're taking on a task that's uniquely challenging, partly because of the expectations that are placed on them that are not always healthy.
Really good. I think I counted about 6 different tangents I could have gone on when you just spoke, because you hit so many great points under this lifestyle, right? You talked about self-awareness, you talked about skill, as well as gifting, you talked about family, you talked about kids, you talked about marriage, you talked about expectations. So there are so many great dialogues, which again proves to us that we really need to delve more into this as we're going on. But let me just keep this going today. So we talked about the calling. Again, we were honoring those that are called to pastor, lead congregations and churches. The lifestyle that comes with it that is really, really difficult, but also same as other Christians. We're just called to be Christians and live normal Christian life. But the difference with, say, the pastoral role, and we've all been pastors, is that as a pastor, you end up in a fishbowl and they all see how you live. And they see how your kids live. So or they're looking more. But I want to take it to the last step today, which is about from calling to lifestyle to impact, or about kingdom impact outside of the church. So how does the church leader, the pastor, again, using that term, how do they help take this internal kingdom culture or lifestyle and actually get it externally? And Bruce Friesen, you've already touched on this a little bit, that if you lead well, you actually do care about what other people are called to in your church. So you're seeing that Bob over here is a business guy, so I want to equip him for that. And Sally over here is a teacher, and I want to equip her for that. And this guy here is called into working in the government. So that's one way of doing it. Bruce, man, you talked about honoring the fact that there is only one church in the city. So how do we honor that bigger picture of the church? And so just for a couple minutes, I want to talk about something that's been helpful for me, is looking at Matthew 5, where Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes, as he starts talking about that we're called to be salt and light, like we're called to be light. Up until then, I was comfortable with Jesus being the light. Like, I'm comfortable if Jesus says, I'm the light. Yeah, of course you are, Jesus. But when Jesus says, now we're the light, that makes it trickier. So we're called to be salt. We're called to be light. We're called to be a city on a hill. And then he says, if you do this well, they will see your good works. They, being the people outside of the church, will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And I think that understanding of, we're all called to be salt, we're all called to be light, we can do this in a way that if we do it with the right kind of kingdom culture, righteousness, peace, and joy, others will see us doing it going, oh, that's really good. I want part of that. They'll see your lifestyle. They'll see your good works. They see what you're doing in the city. And then they'll go, you must have a great God. They'll glorify your Father in heaven. And that has been really, really helpful for me to grab an understanding, probably not a perfect one, but to grab an understanding of Jesus' words in Matthew 5 to go, yeah, we are called to, yes, lead well those that show up on Sunday at, quote, my church, my congregation, yes, but it's also part of a bigger role of how do we get that into our communities, into our cities, into every sphere in our city. And the last piece I'll add to that is, now I'm actually called to be part of the 7 mountains. So we're focusing on the church as a mountain today, but now it's like, how does the church pastor fit with the guy in business, the lady in teaching, the person in government? Because to actually affect effectively reach a city and disciple a city on the way to discipling nations. It's actually the integration of all these together as the kingdom culture that changes where we're at. So that's a piece I wanted to bring to this for today. Bruce Friesen, anything you would add to that or anything we've said so far?
If we're looking at the influence of salt and light as the body of Christ, as Christians, we could identify what are we going to measure, create an index for, to be able to do an assessment. Are we gaining influence or are we losing influence? If we're gaining influence, why? If we're losing influence, why? We need to be able to understand not only that we're gaining or losing it, but we need to be able to have an understanding of why, so that we can continue to be able to go along this line to ensure that things are kingdomized in a greater way by us as Christians being the salt of the earth, the light of the world, or kingdom leaven transforming culture.
Excellent. Guys, it's been excellent. Really today, what we wanted to do is honor those that are called to lead churches, pastors. Understand their calling is a significant calling. And so, again, when we talk about bringing these callings together, we're not trying to pull down the pastoral or church leader calling. So we're actually raising up all of them together in the Seven Mountains. So we want to honor the church leader, the lifestyle that comes with that, because it's not easy. It's not one to be chosen lightly. You may want to hear from God on that one, like all the rest. But then what does that mean for your community? By the way, I said in the way passing a few minutes ago that you could just get our book and understand everything. And we've just released our book called Just Kingdomize It. So you can get that on Amazon. Go ahead. Just look for Just Kingdomize It under Kingdomize Global. And you can find that there. We'd love you to pick it up, read the book, find out about it. We've got a full day seminar based on that book. We'd love to come and work with you on that. Lots of things to do. So if that would help you or your church or your business or your group in a city, we would love to do that with you. Share this with somebody. Talk to somebody about what you heard today. Give us some feedback. Hit like, you know the deal. We'd love you to do that. And so thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week on Kingdomize the podcast.
Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.